Good morning, everyone. First, we'd like to thank you for joining us today. This is our first presentation in a series of 3. It's also the first of a shorter time format for webinars, 30 minutes instead of the full hour. There's some webinar fatigue. We know that getting an hour into the day might be a little more difficult. So new format for us, hopefully maybe for you as well. But please give us feedback on whether this format is good, bad, or indifferent. Presentation is being recorded. You'll receive the slides and the recording at the end in an email. We've tried to reserve time at the end of the presentation for any questions. So if you'd like to submit any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature in the control box, and we'll monitor those and, like I said, get through as many as we can at the end of today's presentation. And again, thank you for joining us. I'd like to introduce today's topic of legacy planning, how strong families survive tough times. Just like to take a moment to introduce this topic. As a full service provider of fiduciary services, Peak Trust Company has the opportunity to see the planning process and the outcomes of many families. Every family that we get the opportunity to work with has put a lot of time and energy into their plan. But sometimes there's a missing piece. It's the financial planning, legal planning part that's gotten a lot of time, but maybe the people planning side of it hasn't. We see there's a common denominator between the families with plans that kind of endure and the ones that maybe don't. And so typically that common denominator centers around some form of family governance. With that, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Tom Rogerson, CEO of GenLeg Co. GenLeg Co. And Tom Rogerson is recognized as a leader and pioneer in family governance throughout the world. Tom uses his 6 steps to healthy family governance to assist families with communication, philanthropic vision, legacy planning, succession, and education. Tom incorporates these critical issues into the client's comprehensive wealth management plan, not only helping to bring and prepare the family for the money, but to also prepare the family for the money. So with that, I turn it over to Tom. And Tom, thank you for being with us this morning.
Well, thank you, Matt. I'm glad to be with you and with everybody else. And thank you for Peak Trust Company for sponsoring this, and for Barbara for all of our help as well. Yes, actually, Matt just mentioned the 6-step process, and I know if you're looking at the slide, you see it now says the 7-step process. Due to COVID, we've had to go online with our program, and to do that, we broke it up into a 7th step, and I'll get into that a little bit as we get into this material. But I hope you find this helpful. I do like the format that Matt described. We're going to try and break this up into 3 sections. I would refer to it as sort of the first part today will be, what's the problem? The second part will be, what are families doing about it? And the third would be, what can you do about it? What can you as a parent and or an advisor to parents and families do about this, and change your practice, literally change it to be more productive and more powerful now, especially in light of COVID. And we'll try and get into that as well. Well, to start it off, we've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right in. Here are some statistics to kind of keep in mind, that 70% of families, of wealthy families, fail at transferring their wealth by the end of the 2nd generation, just after 1 generation of the founders dying. 97% of multi-generational wealth transfers fail within 3 generations. So grandchildren typically die broke. 61% from a Morningstar study recently rate legacy development as a top financial need, and yet they're saying their advisors are not bringing up legacy development as part of their offering or curriculum or conversation. 86% of families say that it's important to leave values and life lessons as inheritance, and yet they often find it's not in the planning process. What I often say to people is, gee, if I took your will, and I'm talking about really wealthy people, if I took your will and I took the front and back pages off of your will and shuffled it with 25 other wills of clients of ours, you couldn't pick out your will. There's no you in there. There's no family purpose. There's no values. There's no importance of life lessons in your documents themselves. And families are looking for that now, and it's possible to do it. It doesn't have to be a side letter. Side letters aren't anywhere near as effective. David York, an estate planner in the Salt Lake area, said that of the clients coming into his practice, 90% of the families are saying that the plans that they had coming in do not deal with their goals, their wants, and their objectives. Because believe it or not, and this is bold to say to a bunch of advisors, believe it or not, their goals, wants, and objectives are not to get 10% more money to their kids. Their goals, wants, and objectives are for the kids to appreciate what they get really effectively and have it be the blessing that the parents would like it to be. And how do we help them with that? And yet inevitably I get on these webinars with other advisors and all they're focusing on is, well, here's how we can put a little spin on this one and a little spin on that one. And it's all about the money and the tax minimization. Don't get me wrong, my background's estate planning, so I think it's important, but it's not the be all and end all. As a great example of the shift that's happening, this January, I spoke at Heckerling, and the reason for that was last year at Heckerling, they did a survey of the attendees and asking, what's the biggest impediment to your families implementing their estate plan successfully? And by far, 46% said the biggest, this was the largest reaction, by the way, 46%, the biggest problem was family conflict. And unlike historically, what they were usually focusing on was, how do we draft documents to protect the assets in the trust from family conflict? That's not what the push was this year. The push now is becoming more, wait a minute, our clients are young. They're in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They're going to be around a long time. How do we help them with family conflict now? Not when they're dead, now. Because after they're dead, it's way too late. So these are just some of the statistics. One of the largest studies of families that actually had failed, this was a study done by Williams and Pressure, and it's been supported by so many other studies, but it's one of the largest ones. They studied over 3,500 families that owned a family business and had significant wealth at least one generation ago. And they found that most of these families failed, but they asked one step further. They said, well, you lived through the failure. What happened? What caused the failure? And the biggest reason for failure, according to families that failed, was due to lack of trust around group decision-making. Group decision-making is governance. So this is really a lack of trust in governance. People get fixated on the word communication in this one. It really isn't that they can't talk. And some people think, oh, communication, we talk all the time, we're fine. Not realizing, no, it's the trust around group decision-making that is the crux, and that's really the key. 25% of the failure was due to unprepared heirs. People received money they didn't have the vocabulary of what to do with and how it worked. 10% of the failure was due to family members not feeling a sense of place or purpose in their family. And you're going to see that's becoming exacerbated by COVID. And again, what can we do about it to be relevant, timely, and maybe have this message be our business development message going into the next few years? Anyway, we'll add that up. That's 95% of the problem. Less than 5% of the failure was due to failures in financial planning, taxes, and investments. So the bulk of the reason for the failure had nothing to do with the quality of the planning and the quality of the intellect of the advisor. Had almost everything to do with culture, because those first three are culture issues. And Peter Drucker had it right when he said, and he's a business consultant, but still this quote absolutely relates to families as well. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so many times, I mean, I literally had a family meeting 2 weeks ago, a virtual one, and the father was saying, yeah, we got to get to the important stuff, the money, and we really got to focus on that kind of thing. And by the end of the meeting, he was saying, wow, culture really does eat. I wanted to focus on the strategy. I'm recognizing what we need to focus on is the culture. And how can you as an advisor help a family focus on the culture? Our 7-step process takes a family through, and I do this in reverse order because you got to start at the foundation, which is down here at the base, and work your way up, I think. So an assessment of where the family is today, an education of them of why families are failing. What I'm sharing with you today, a lot of this material is material we would share with a family as the education to the family of why families are failing. Next meeting, we'll talk a little bit about the communication tools you can use, values exercises, empathic communication, which my wife compiled together, action steps families can take, and then advancement down the road. But today I'm going to try and make reference to these first two, and you're going to see the education, the portion we're going to talk about really is an education for family members as well. And what I thought I'd start out with to give you a sense of this is a graphic that I found many entrepreneurs find to be eye-opening. One of the biggest challenges we have in the work that I do is when I tell people what I do at a cocktail party or something, these rich, wealthy, very successful business owners will lean in and say, oh, I get it. You work with dysfunctional families. Oh, good to know. If I ever meet one, I'll try and remember to steer them to you, not realizing that, no, wait a minute, I work with families just like yours. And when I share this slide with these very same people, I'm amazed at how many of them say, oh my goodness, you're describing my upbringing and you're describing how I'm trying to raise my children. And I thought it was great. And I didn't realize I might have been actually causing a problem. And so here's the simplicity of this graphic. I've had a number of advisors actually use this and during lunch, drawing on the back of a napkin. So what is the story that goes behind it and what does the graphic look like? On the graphic, just imagine that the level of wealth goes out to the right as we go out to the right. Jim Grubman, by the way, the clinical psychologist that wrote the book Strangers in Paradise, actually proposed this visual to tell this story, and everything I wanted to tell fit in this visual perfectly. But anyway, imagine the level of wealth going up as we go out to the right, and imagine the human dependence scale on the left-hand side, and kind of reverse human dependence, where we've got dependent people up here, kind of like infants and young children, independent people when they get to teenage and young adult years, and then interdependent when they join the workforce and realize we have to work together. So it's kind of reverse human development, but and what we found was low net worth families on this graphic typically had tremendous interdependence by necessity. Let me paint the picture of what that looks like and what I mean by that. What I mean by that is that low net worth families, dinner table conversations are very consequential. They're sharing, they're making decisions about limited resources. These people might be sharing a bedroom together or maybe a bathroom, and they may be going to public school at the end of the day. And they often have summer jobs and are living at home in the summertime. Many interactions, reasons to bump into each other along the way. And as I said before, dinner table conversations are different. When Johnny says, hey, can I borrow the car on Friday night? Everyone gets involved because it's the car. And so they're learning. They might not like it. It seems like a pain in the neck, but they learn a tremendous amount about each other. They're learning how to share and make decisions together. They're learning life lessons. And by the way, almost all the studies out there today are about COVID are talking about the fact that, boy, this is really a problem. Quarantine and isolation is causing separation in families, and to be resilient and have success at succeeding at overcoming obstacles like COVID and then job markets and you name it, business issues and the like, you need to be connected, because through connection you build resilience. Well, these people are building resilience because they're working with each other and learning about each other all the time. As I said, they might not like it, but they know a tremendous amount about each other. Well, if somebody in that family succeeds financially and builds some wealth, becomes a CEO or starts a company, an entrepreneur, and they make some money, they want to get away from all that pain in the neck, and they want to raise their children in this middle dot where they can raise their children to be independent, of course, the American dream. And then they want their children to raise their children to, to thrive beyond that, make more money, be independent, just be, hugely successful. Well, let me paint the picture what that middle dot looks like. Dinner table conversations here aren't as consequential. Typically, these are more social. Hey, how's your golf game? How's your tennis game? These children often have their own bedroom. Maybe they have their own bathroom, in suite sometimes. They often have their own car at age 16, even if the parents don't buy it for them. They often, buy one themselves. And they often, not always, but they often go to private school or summer camp. More and more opportunities to be separated from the family and actually know them less. And that doesn't mean they don't love each other, but they don't know each other as well. And this is often causing more fragility than down here. This made sense to me. My mother's family comes from a Cuban poverty. She's one of 8 children from southern Cuba, and they had nothing growing up. But the interdependence that they built, working together, all the things that they worked together on, plus getting out of a communist country together, built tremendous interdependence until my mother died. If she had a problem, I had a hard time getting there in time to help her because my uncles and aunts got there before I did. My father's family came from American wealth. And I won't go into the details, but one of the largest trust companies in the Northeast was actually started by my great grandfather. It was called Boston Safe Deposit and Trust Company. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was a dominant institution in Boston. He started a foundation that right now has a little bit more than $1 billion in it. That's with a B. I mean, even by today's standards, he was doing okay. His estate plan was designed to get the bulk of the money down to the family. I'm his great grandson, and it's gone. And it's gone because of how the family operated. We actually, wonderful, loving family, but we often used quite a bit of the financial resources to allow separation, independence to the point of estrangement. Well, down here, these families are sharing wealth and sharing assets by necessity. And what's interesting about this is the overlay of what about happiness? Where are the happiest families on this graph? And people often think, well, they're going to be out here somewhere, that the more wealth, the more happiness. That's not actually the case. In a number of studies that have been done in this, and one of the largest was one of the earliest ones, they asked families, what level of financial income do you have and all, but also what level of happiness are you in your family? And the highest level of happiness self-professed by family members was in a family that had a gross family income originally of a little bit less than $80,000 a year. This is the gross family income. And it's gone up a little bit since then, but not anywhere near as much as you might think. Beyond that, they said the happiness actually plateaued and then started to decline. What they said at this level of wealth, they had enough for what they needed, not enough for what they wanted. They knew each other better, and they had resilience through the knowledge of each other. I just thought that was really interesting. Well, this, by the way, down here in the lower left-hand corner is an entrepreneurial incubator. When I said earlier that when I mention this and I show this to clients or draw on the back of a napkin at a cocktail party, I'll have so many people saying, you're describing how I grew up with my siblings, and you're describing how I've been raising my children. And I thought it was great, but you're right. I think it's more social than it is consequential. Well, what we are finding that this is an entrepreneurial incubator down here. The environment that these entrepreneurs raise their children in is an entrepreneurial kill zone. We're going to talk about why that is in the next webinar, but entrepreneurs don't realize they're raising their children in an environment that is very unlikely to create entrepreneurs down the road. Well, they want their children to move in this direction, and some do thrive and move in this direction. Unfortunately, it's a small percentage. A larger percentage can feel uncomfortable and feel a sense of guilt or embarrassment about the lifestyle they were raised in. You've probably heard parents talked about the fact that one of their kids said, don't drop me off in front of school in the Lamborghini. I don't want people thinking that we're gazillionaires or not. And that actually, this is not when they're young. When the kids are young, their lifestyle is just normal. We go on vacations, maybe have a private jet or charter one, and we have pools and all these wonderful things. But when they get to college and they meet their roommate and they say, hey, where do you summer? And the roommate says, at home. And they say, yeah, but which home? And they go, the home. And they can start to get a sense of guilt or embarrassment over the lifestyle they were raised in. And what's interesting to me about that is children coming out of wealthy families are 2 to 5 times more likely to move in this direction up here to the upper left, evidencing, we had these epidemics before COVID hit us of anxiety. Go back and look at the New York Times articles that were talking about the epidemics of loneliness alone. And you'll see multiple, same in the Wall Street Journal, and anxiety and depression and addiction and abuse, and go down the list. Children of wealthy families are 2 to 5 times more likely to move in that direction and or stay in that location of a dependent state down the road. Well, the O'Connor Group in Boston is a wonderful group of psychologists that focus on dealing with families of wealth and the presenting problems that come up with it. My daughter works at a school focused on the same thing. How do we help children coming out of wealthy families deal with the presenting problems that wealth can be, not causing, that wealth can be allowing? And that to me is the real critical thing about all this. Wealth doesn't cause this problem. Wealth allows the funding of the separation. It's the separation and the not feeling connected as much that is actually causing the problem. Well, how do we as advisors then, you as advisors, help a family get from this location in the middle down here to the lower right to a place of renewed interdependence? Well, over here, they were in a place of interdependence by necessity. They had to. If they're going to do it over here, it's going to be sharing assets and sharing decisions voluntarily, which means they're going to need understanding. Somebody has to share that with them. And you may be a better person to share that with the family than the parent. Well, I call this the red zone because caution, well, not just caution, there's a lot of negatives of all that independence we've been advocating. And I'm saying this as a red-blooded American. Independence to an extreme is not healthy for individuals. Interdependence can be much healthier. I call this the orange zone, caution. Before you abandon interdependence, be careful. As you succeed financially, how do you keep don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I call this the green zone over here. If we can get to a place like this, that's a great thing. How would the plan you're putting together for a client actually take some of this into account, whether it's the estate plan or the financial plan? And even if you think you did a brilliant job of this, I did a phenomenal, my kids are great, we make consequential decisions together all the time, then they get married. Their spouses usually come from somewhere left of where the family is, lower net worth in the family. Just by definition, the families we're often dealing with are higher net worth. It's not like I'm advocating you have to be down at this bottom line here of interdependence only. Independence is great, but the healthy zone is in between the two, where we have levels of independence that allow people to follow their passion and dreams, but that they are connected to the family and understand how and why to do it over time. Here's a quote that I often say at a cocktail party to get people starting to focus on, and I'm going to share some others with you at the end of today, but starting to get people to focus on some of this. You don't have enough money to give your children the blessings of growing up poor. And that's really the critical notion on this. Ideally, and this comes from David York, the family purpose should drive the planning process, and the planning process should support the family purpose. And if you do that, if we create a family purpose, that's not parents' purpose, that's a family shared purpose. If we help a family come up with their purpose and the plan is designed to be driven by that and supports it, then the money and the assets can go along for the ride. It's a wonderful image. I love the fact that David York put that together. It's unfortunately like a unicorn, though. It doesn't exist. I've almost never seen it. What we see is the assets, the tax minimization, and the control drive the planning process, and the planning process supports the assets, then the tax minimization and the control, and the family purpose over in left field. I mentioned earlier that I would share with you just a little bit about the assessment process we take families through and what it is. We give families a series of statements. Everybody gets one of these sheets, and there's a series of statements here, but I highlighted one for you, that we have a plan for a genuine transfer of leadership within our family and or business if we have one. And on one side, they grade, how important is it for our family to achieve that particular statement? And on the other side, they grade, how well are we doing at it? I happen to pick that particular statement. There's a bunch in there about values and about causes we give to and about all kinds of things. But this particular one is often a 5 on level of importance and a 0 on a level of accomplishment. What we do is when we get these back from family members, we tabulate it and we put it in order. This was the one that was their number one biggest gap from how important it was to how well they're achieving it. And for this family, it was that we have identified best roles for each of our family members along the way. But you can see and we would tabulate this. So the family kind of sets their own guideline of what we need to do to get better going forward. We also do interviews with family members, and we tabulate what the interview reactions are. The next step of our process, we take the family through an education process. This should be lifelong learning for the family. And I've listed, this is in the PDF that you have access to as well, but there's a list of different topics, and it goes on and on. This should be lifelong learning that the family engages in. You're going to see why it's important a family has a process of learning together. And I'm going to talk about what that looks like. Again, I think this is particularly important, not just because of COVID, but if you take a look at Strauss and Howe's book, The Fourth Turning, I'm not saying it's accurate. They make projections of what the future might look like based on historical cycles. but it's interesting to look at some of these cycles, these generational cycles, and that they talk about, the hero generation, the GIs, versus the silent generation, the artists that came along beyond it, growing up in that very positive new environment and economy. The boom generation, the prophets, realizing an awakening of things starting to get a little bit more difficult as it rises. And then the nomads, the unraveling, where things start to get difficult. And then maybe another, the millennials might be the hero generation. Really interesting to look at this book, because there may be some ideas of what families we're working with may be dealing with going forward. If families are succeeding multi-generationally, and of the 250 families we've worked with, or 260 plus the 200 we interviewed on top of that, many of them have survived multiple generations, which means by definition they have lived through the Spanish flu, the Great Depression, world wars, the dot-com bubble, the Great Recession. If families can live through things like that, so can we, and so can our clients. But it will take different thinking, and it may take a different culture. The other book I recommend to take a look at when it comes to cycles that compound the issue of COVID. COVID may be really prompting some of the cycles that are being talked about in these books, but The Storm Before the Calm by Friedman. Really interesting, again, to get a sense of what might we be facing in a leadership crisis going forward. In the breakout, excuse me, not the breakout, in the PDF, I encourage you to take a look at some of these reflections that we encourage you to think about. These are just reflections, how might COVID change some of the culture issues we're dealing with and within families that we're working with. I also, in the PDF, you're going to see some takeaway thoughts to really dwell on. How do you start it with your clients and or your family to get into this space? First of all, I'd learn the language of family governance and legacy. Read some of the books that are in the resource list. It's also in the PDF. Other things to think about, though. Think about some questions you can ask clients and prospects. Do you know why and how most families fail at preserving both family and their wealth? Do you know how to prepare children for their inheritance? As a family, have you defined your intangible family wealth, not your money? And have you and your children achieved your family or archived your family history yet? What's your family legacy plan? Can I see it? These are just designed questions you can use in your practice to get people starting to think about it. What should families do? Get started. Add a family governance process to your practice and to their families that you're working with. Hire experienced facilitators to help get started in this space. Schedule family meetings for families that you're working with and others. Set up a fast, and I'll describe that in one of the other sessions we're going to talk about. We can help if you'd like, but get started now. Last thing I'll mention, these are the key takeaways I hope for you all. Most families are failing. The cause is not the phenomenal wealth, but this is this erosion of the family group decision-making process. Most modern estate plans don't address this. In fact, many modern estate plans cause the problem, don't solve the problem. And family culture is hard to change. That's a lot to cover for this one. I hope you'll join us for the next half-an-hour session, which will be a couple of days, but it'll be on the next leg of this journey. Before I mention the question and answer time, just briefly, you'll see I highlighted in the PDF just a few of the resources. There's a whole long list here. I'm not saying you have to read all these, but if you want to know resources that would be great to look at, I've highlighted the first ones in yellow. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt for the couple of minutes we have for Q&A if there are any questions people have.
Thanks so much. We did get a couple of questions. The first one is this process as scary as it might seem?
I thought that when I first started doing this, I thought, what the heck am I doing? I'm doing estate planning, and I'm going to go to a family meeting and get in the middle, or they're going to blow up, and this is going to be a nightmare. It isn't. It isn't. It usually, and I mean like 95% of the time, if you come in with information, everybody is looking for it. Parents want their children to pick up the ball. Children want to pick up the ball, but nobody's letting the other do it. And I think you're going to find a much warmer reception than you think you're going to find. So, and call if you need help or assistance at getting started, but I really recommend getting started.
Sorry, another question. If a family already has an estate plan, but they wanted to include these concepts. Any idea on how to quantify the time that it might take for somebody to really go back through, and do they have to redo the estate plan in its entirety or just add on to it?
Great question. I'm glad you asked that, whoever asked it, because what we're finding is one of the first things to tack on to an estate plan is just one more trust. An attorney named Marvin Blum and I created called a FAST trust, stands for Family Advancement Sustainability Trust. And we'll talk a little bit more about it in the other sessions. But the FAST trust is designed to endow a family meeting process. And that's a great first step. Even if you don't change the existing estate plan, trust, or anything else, if you add that to the mix, they're likely to at least be getting together going forward with the intention of learning together. That will allow them to actually take advantage of the plan you put in place more beneficially. If they decide they want to change the plan, so be it. I will tell you that the advisors that we're working with their clients are finding that they're getting more planning work out of the existing clients that thought they were done, because the clients are recognizing they would like to make some changes based on the family input.
Great. And then last question for today. At a high level, can you tell us how families deal with certain individuals of the family who might be kind of resistant to this type of planning?
Yeah, a lot of parents say that. They say, if I got 4 kids and one of them is a naysayer, I can't do this because I can't, that'd be like Sophie's Choice, leaving one of them out. Our motto is, if you have a naysayer in the family, building a bond of the other 3 is, first of all, going to be very helpful at them dealing with the naysayer going forward. But it's also very appealing to get the naysayer to want to join that group. And not always the case, but usually the case. And so our motto is, take the willing and go forth. Leave the door open for the naysayers. Leave it open also to kick them out. If somebody acts badly ongoing in a family meeting, there's no reason why the family can't say, you're off the island. We can't wait for you to come back, but you have to behave differently to be here. But have the door open for those that in the beginning just say, oh, thumbs up to you. I'm on my own. But I would say we are finding take the willing and go forth, and you usually find stragglers want to rejoin over time.
Great. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us for today's session. Again, this is the first of the series of 3. Our next one starts Thursday, the 9th of July at 12 p.m. Eastern, again, same time. And we look forward to seeing everyone then. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody. So I'm assuming I give it back to you, Matt.
Sure, unless you can.
I don't know how to do that, actually.